Hello everyone, good evening and namaste. Welcome to the second session on decoding the world order post the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm your host Tenzin Yonten, a third generational Tibetan human rights advocate working as a research associate under the Indic Researchers Forum. During this session, we will discuss on key factors leading up to the war, its impact, further implication on the world order, and possible solution moving forward. Our session chair for this session is Major General Shashi Asthana. Major General S.P. Asthana has been awarded Sena Medal and Vishesh Seva Medal. He is a globally acknowledged strategic and security analyst who has authored over 400 publications. He is a veteran infantry general with 40 years of experience at national and both international fields. Furthermore, he has held various key appointments in Army and UN as an instructor and speaker at various UN organizations, strategics, and military forums and universities. He has been awarded twice by the President of India and the UN. He is also the receiver of CEE Excellence Award for Nation Building by the Governor of Haryana. General, we are honored and happy to have you among us. For today's session, we have 7 speakers. So our speakers are Sir Igor Fedyk, Alexandra Dudchak, Velina Tchakarova,
Yes, one moment, please. Hello.
Professor Madhav Nalapat, Dr. Satoru Nagao, Przemyslaw Ozierski, and finally, Professor Kaunert. I extend our warm greetings to all the speakers and request our session chair, General Asthana, to proceed with the session. Over to you, sir. Sir, you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Indic Research Forum. It's a pleasure to be on your forum, as well as a good initiative in a manner that this is the topic and perhaps the hottest topic in the world which is going around. We did cover a lot as far as the implications on India are concerned and what is the Indian perspective. Now I think the second session is totally dedicated to what are the global implications and how the galaxy of panelists is going to decode as to how the world is going to transform post this conflict into various, shall we say, groupings, or how perhaps the implications will play out in the global domain. So therefore, before I move further, I must highlight few points. I mean, just 2-3 points, because we are already running behind time. I'll skip a number of things so that we can expedite. Firstly, we all realize that Cold War 1.0 perhaps has ended when it was in 1991. So USSR broke up, and I think everybody made a loud noise because of that. But the NATO-Russian contestation kept it alive. And what we find today is a very dangerous war, a dangerous dimension of war rolling over to the third week. And it is becoming intense with accusations of the nuclear references, biological references, accusations, counter-accusations, and things like that. Unfortunately, it was avoidable. Had we had some few security guarantees, and if the big power contestation had not spiraled it over, perhaps we could have avoided it. Today, what we find is Russia and Ukraine, they are fighting a kinetic contact warfare, but this warfare is now getting into hybrid domain, and both sides are also inviting certain mercenaries and non-state actors. So that is also changing the dimension of this warfare. In addition, there are other parties to the conflict. The West is also fighting a non-contact warfare, a non-kinetic warfare, and a undeclared war simultaneously in the form of economic war, information war, diplomatic war, and so on and so forth. So therefore, there are no holy cows. Everybody has his interest. Everybody is working on those interests, and that is how the things are moving. So therefore now, as I move forward to this session, I must say, we now have speakers from various countries, which also include speakers from the affected countries. We appreciate that the things are sensitive, and the views are also at times, because there have been a number of debates I have taken part in, which are the international debates, and I find that the rhetorics, the sentiments, they do come out. So therefore, what I would request is to follow just 2-3 guidelines. One is, because of the paucity of time, I'll request everyone to keep his initial comments for 10 minutes. After that, we will take on any point which you want to make, because when some other speaker has spoken, maybe that you may like to speak something else or clarify something else. We will get that time only if you restrict yourself to about 10 to 12 minutes in your initial comments. Secondly, no interruptions, please, when somebody is speaking, because these are sensitive issues. I do appreciate whether you agree or not, everybody is entitled to his view. And third is, for the audience, please, if you have any questions, give it on the chat box, and also indicate as to whom you want to address that question, so that while we are proceeding, your questions, the person who has to answer that question, he gets acquainted with the question, and thereafter I don't waste time in reading out the question or what the question was and things like that. I'm given to understand that Professor Nalapath has to leave a little earlier. So I'll first request the professor. He is the editorial director of ITV Network. He is the first professor of geopolitics.
I think, General Asthana, we can stop here.
Yes, I will. But the only thing I want to say is, he is one of the most credible voice in India on strategic affairs and on televisions. So everybody knows him. I don't think I have to introduce him much. Over to Professor Nalapath. And I would request him to perhaps educate us on how it is going to play out for Indo-Pacific region. Professor Nalapath.
Thank you very much, General Asthana. I'm grateful to you for your kind words. And I'm also very happy to be here with the Indic Researchers Forum. I would like to take off from where I heard Datesh speak. And there has been a view that India's policy in the Ukraine conflict has been, in a sense, opportunistic. We depend on Russian arms. Russia, is an important supplier. So, unfortunately or otherwise, we have to support, we have to take a neutral stand. We're not supporting anybody. We are supporting an impartial stand. And that's what India is doing, including in this matter of biological weapons. I'm sure we'll take an impartial stand and ask for an impartial inquiry, which I think the whole world would welcome. So it's not an opportunistic policy that's being followed by the government headed by Narendra Modi. It's a principled policy. And, may I sketch? I'm in the private sector. I'm in a private university. So obviously there's no connection with government at all. But from my limited interaction with people in government at various levels, I thank you for giving me this opportunity of explaining some elements of this principled policy that India is adopting. The first thing I'd like to say is that when we talk of, the Russians have been asking for a conference on European security. This has become particularly urgent after Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can hear you now. We can hear you now. I think.
I'm so sorry. I made an error. My point is, General Asthana, thank you for your introduction. I'd like to say that the policy of Prime Minister Modi is not opportunistic in the sense that we depend on Russia, so we're taking this policy. It is a principled policy. And allow me to sketch a few reasons why from my vantage point as an ordinary citizen, as an ordinary academic, as a private citizen, unconnected with government, but with a little bit of, what do I say, a little bit of contact with various elements in government, I just like to sketch that. The first point is that, when we talk about European security, and we basically act in a manner that ignores the security of half of the continent of Europe, which is the Russian Federation, I fail to understand exactly what is meant by that kind of security. If you're talking of European security, there is no question, but there has to be security across Europe. And you cannot have security of one part at the expense of the other part. You cannot, for example, have the security of half of Europe, namely the non-Russian part, and ignore the security of the Russian part, or have the security only of the Russian part and ignore the non-Russian part, which comprises of the members of NATO, barring two from North America. So I'd like to say that we don't understand a concept of security in which the security interests of geographically half of Europe are effectively not only ignored, but in a sense, treated extremely cavalierly. That is the first point. Second point is, of course, what has been done since 2014, in particular with Ukraine, and the effort to make Ukraine, in a sense, a frontline state in NATO's particular, obsession with Russia. Now, I don't blame NATO for that. They're very comfortable. They're a huge bureaucracy. You have multiple numbers of people, but and so they obviously want a justification. And now they're talking about the eastern flank of NATO. Well, I'm sorry, we in Asia still have memories of colonial occupation by European powers. We don't need an eastern flank. And if our American friends insist that NATO is going to look after our security, we are going to tell our American friends exactly what the foreign minister and the prime minister told Mr. Blinken and Mr. Biden at the two Quad conferences, that look, if you want a statement against Russia, if you want to divert the attention of the Quad away from the Indo-Pacific, back to the Atlantic, away from China, back to Russia, sorry, you're not going to get India on board. If that is the Quad, sorry, if it's going to be directed against Russia, if it's going to be Europe-centered, we are not going to be a part of it. I'm happy to say that both in the case of President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken, and of course they had persuaded our Japanese and Australian friends to go along with this formulation that the real enemy is Russia and not China. I'm not sure that Dr. Nagao will in his heart of hearts agree, but where he is in Washington, I'm sure he'll be very more than usually diplomatic about it. So I'd like to point out, quite frankly, there is no to ignore Russian security is, in our view, quite wrong. And the whole purpose of this conflict, this making Ukraine a frontline state, and now that President Putin has refused to go the way of Boris Yeltsin and Mikhail Gorbachev and make unilateral concession after unilateral concession. Well, India knows Russia, and we have been warning our friends quite often that Russia under Putin is not Russia under Yeltsin or Russia under Gorbachev, USSR. It's quite different. Just as today, it's not Cold War 1.2. You correctly mentioned, General Asthana, Cold War 2.2. It's between the US principally and China. And this whole thing has diverted the attention back to the US and Russia. Now, as senator, Biden was obsessed with Russia. And he was extremely nice to China. He was, of course, equally nice to Pakistan, and not particularly happy with India, because we, as has been said in the past, we developed our missile programs, we developed our atomic weapon programs, and we did not stop until we had a triad, and now we are improving that triad and with hypersonic systems. But I'd only like to point out that what NATO wants is a kind of a new Versailles Treaty. And I don't mean the Versailles meeting, which has been convened by President Macron. France is a good and trusted friend of India. In the 1998, uproar that came up from China, from the US, from Europe, one exception was France. France stood by India, and we are grateful to that. We are very grateful to France, and President Macron has stood by India, and we are really grateful to him for that. But I'd like to say, what happened after the Versailles Treaty? If I'm not mistaken, in 1919-20, these discussions went on. What happened after that? It produced an Adolf Hitler. Now, there is a perception, and frankly, it is, talking to my Western friends, and I have very many Western friends built over the decades. In fact, I have been to Dr. Nagao's institute, the Hudson Institute, multiple times, and I have very many very good friends there. And I have been quite upfront, if I may say so, about the Indian position, especially about Iran and Russia. So the point is very clear. If you have what you're looking for is basically the surrender of Russia to NATO and the members of NATO. Now that is going to create, Putin will of course be removed if he goes away from his objectives by which he has launched this war, by which already his country is suffering enormous consequences, then he is definitely going to be on the chopping block. There will be regime change, but there will not be regime change of a Yeltsin or a Gorbachev coming back. There'll be regime change of a much more hardline Russian leader taking over. I mean, you're not going to believe this, but I track China pretty well. And I must confess that whenever I've gone to China, and even these days, I'm invited on CGTN. Next week, China Daily is carrying an article of mine. They asked me, after some time, I finally have agreed, and they'll be carrying it in a few days. The fact is that, now we see Western leaders thinking China is going to help us fight Putin. You know what President Xi is now facing in the Chinese Communist Party leadership? They're asking, why aren't you like Putin? What is wrong with you? You're sitting on a much bigger economy. You're actually dealing with much more, in the case of the subject that Dr. Nagao is going to talk about, Taiwan, a much smaller country than Ukraine with a much smaller army. And you're talking not of Russia. The Western world even today is not going to go to war with Russia, number one. Number two, they're not going to have oil and gas sanctions on Russia. Joe Biden thinks he can afford it. I'm not sure if the Democratic Party is going to believe that he could have afforded it after what we are going to see in 2022 November after the midterms. But I'd only like to say very frankly that kind of in China, Xi Jinping is now being told by several prominent individuals in China, and I'm talking as someone who likes the Chinese people and who deeply admires and respects the manner in which the Chinese Communist Party has sought to extend its domination over the Eurasian continent and the Indo-Pacific. China is our strategic adversary, but you cannot, if you have an underestimation of your adversary, you're making a huge mistake, as big a mistake as overestimation. So Xi Jinping is being asked, Putin is doing this, and you're not really supporting him. You have been neutral. You're standing with India, and you already damaged your relationship with India. A lot of people have publicly been pointing out to Xi Jinping, why did he have in his Beijing Olympics somebody, who was in that among the number of PLA soldiers who committed the most unspeakable actions against Indian soldiers, who intruded in our territory and behaved as aggressors. Why do you want to provoke India into a boycott, a diplomatic boycott? It did not join the Western boycott. It joined after you decided to have this person waving a flag. What's so important about this person and that flag? That the country like India, our most populous neighbor, with whom we share so many after Russia, the largest border, is keeping out. So Xi Jinping may go, I can tell you, if he shows a similar vacillation as he has shown in the last UNSC meeting. I mean, India, frankly, I think the Russians are happy because the Chinese told them, you'll get zero support from India, 100% from us. Well, they gave 50% support and we gave 50% support. They expected zero from us if they believed the Chinese, and they expected 100% from them if they believed the Chinese. And in both cases, they saw 50%. So I'd leave you to guess as to whether Russia would be happy about that at all. And that is a very smart decision of Prime Minister Modi, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, and the others connected with that particular decision. Because the reality is, don't push Russia over the edge. And may I say, General Asthana, you know, there are some of my writings and conversations that are not entirely public. In fact, not very public. There are a lot of my writings and conversations, including some very, very pleasant joint conversations where you're also there, which are public. And I have been pointing this out for quite some weeks. NATO is goading Putin to war. And eventually, and this is after the invasion, you are going to goad him to basically be the first to launch a nuclear strike. I mean, they didn't believe, us, as has correctly been said by the chairman of the previous session. I don't think they really take India as a serious factor, except as a kind of a lever to use against China. But frankly, judging by the level of consultation that they have with us, but I'm also happy to say that a certain amount of weaponry, etc., is coming to India, which is not bad, but it's about 1/10 of what we would expect from a close strategic partner like the United States. And I hope Dr. Nagao will convey to his friends in the Hudson Institute. Last time I was in Hudson, I did mention about how unhappy India is about the trade, the representative of Trump, and how he was, basically being nastier to India than to China. So that's a different matter altogether. But I'd like to point out that, look, this decision was taken in the national interest. I'd like to quickly run through my points, very frankly. I mean, regime change through the street. If you're doing it in Russia, you're going to get a much more hardline person than Putin to take charge. You did regime change in Iraq. I'm not very sure if, a de-weaponized Saddam Hussein was better for the Western powers than the government which you installed, which finally came because of the will of the Iraqi people, that is very pro-Iran. And India are friends of Iran, and we make no secret of it. We want the Chabahar port, and I was upset when the government of India blocked oil imports from Iran. I said, you're making a huge mistake by succumbing to this kind of pressure. And fortunately, we didn't lose Chabahar because the Iranians understood that. So that's the first point, frankly, that if you want regime change, you'll get the regime change you got in Libya. You'll get the regime change you tried for in Syria, where that little bit of territory, which is not controlled by the Kurds, which incidentally was betrayed by President Trump in that deal with Erdogan. And you are not going to get the regime change which you wanted against Bashar Assad, who incidentally now controls most of the country. And the only part of the country where ISIS and Al-Qaeda are still active is the part of the country where neither the Kurds nor Bashar Assad are active. So, I know, General Asthana, that you're pressed for time. I'm afraid, so I'm sorry, I'm also surprisingly a little busy these days, so you'll have to excuse me. But I simply want to say that, for heaven's sake, don't make Ukraine the collateral damage of your cynical efforts. Now, if you remember, we were talking about Indian students. I'm happy to say that my Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, has succeeded in removing every Indian national who wanted to leave Ukraine from Ukraine. He did this with the cooperation of a gentleman named Vladimir Putin, who's been called a lunatic, a madcap, all kinds of horrible things by top leaders, a killer, in public, on television. That's an amazing way of conducting diplomacy. It's not the Indian way, I can tell you. I'm not sure if President Putin would like it very much, and he would consider you a valid partner in in a negotiation. So having said that, I'd like to say we are taking a stand that is principled. We want to avoid a war that distracts the attention of NATO for the next generation away from China. We are away from, if I were the Taiwanese, I would be very worried about what I'm seeing, frankly, on Ukraine. You keep egging on Ukraine, and then finally you leave it in the lurch. And who are the collateral damage? The collateral damage are the Ukrainian people. And finally, the whole world is going to be collateral damage. We are all going to suffer from this high inflation, from these logistical chain disruptions. All of us are going to suffer. And if this war continues, in other words, if Putin does not get his objectives in Ukraine for about a month and a half or 2 months, we are going to see something which will make the Great Depression look like some tremendous economic boom. And that is making all of us collateral damage. Thank you very much, NATO. Thank you very much, leaders of NATO, for what you have done. And I'm sure the Ukrainian people will be, after a few months of reflection, are not going to be very grateful. Certainly, we are not very grateful to be the collateral damage in your war games. Please understand, Russia is half of Europe. And so long as Russia feels insecure, the whole of Europe will remain insecure. Thank you.
Very well said, Professor Nalapat. And let me tell our foreign friends as well. There is no doubt India is impartial and not neutral, notwithstanding what we discussed in the first session. The second thing is, which I must highlight, that both sides, I repeat, both sides have violated sovereignty, both sides have violated territorial integrity, and therefore nobody is a holy cow, and therefore it is a principal stand of India that we are impartial. The second point I would like to highlight is, yes, NATO is fighting a wrong enemy. There is no doubt about it. Where were they and why didn't they sanction China when it trampled on the sovereignty of others? Why didn't they sanction China when they trampled on the territorial integrity of others in South China Sea? So therefore, everybody is hypocritical, and in this hypocritical world, certainly we are principled, and therefore we have taken a stand of being impartial, and we are proud of the stand which we have taken. Because there will be no more Indian speakers in this forum in the second section hereafter. Now, we would like to hear the Ukrainian view. Now, what has happened is, a lot has happened in, I would say, 17 days war. A lot has happened, there is no doubt about it. We do feel sorry about the people who have become casualties, because in every war, it's the normal people who suffer most. But before that, I think a lot has happened earlier in 1991 and earlier in 1994 as well. So therefore, I have a speaker from Ukraine, and we would like to hear from the horse's mouth, Mr. Igor Fedyk. He is from the Southeastern Europe section of the new Geopolitical Research Network. He has also been a deputy editor of the Ukrainian Defense Review and avid writer and analyst. We would like to hear from you, and we would like you to decode for us as to what were the factors which led to this Russia-Ukraine conflict in your perception, and what do you think, that is the most important thing, could be the way forward as far as peace is concerned, if peace has to return, and if we have to give any chance to peace. Over to you.
Thank you very much for giving the possibility to participate in this event and to share with you the Ukrainian perception on what's going on in my country. Well, I heard the previous speakers, and I understand the Indian perception of what's going on in Ukraine, and so it reflects very the Russian point of view. So the NATO We also heard it from our colleagues in Serbia that there is the war between NATO and Russia, or the United States and China. But I would say, so this is very misunderstanding what's really going on in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. Because to understand well what's going on really on the ground and in bilateral relations between our country and the aggressor country, you have to know well the history of Ukraine and Russia, and at least the history of the last 30 years, the relations between us. So, and speaking about the factors leading to Russia-Ukraine war, so it's not the Ukrainian conflict, not Ukrainian crisis, it is some tried to name during last 8 years. So this is the Russian war against Ukraine, Russian aggression against Ukraine. Is the only factor, and the main factor of this is the President Putin's desire to restore all the Soviet Union and continue opposing the West, NATO, whatever, like it was during the Cold War. So this has been his fixed idea for a long time, and to do this, he needed to destroy the Ukrainian statehood, because the Ukrainians statehood and independent Ukraine with a Western vector of development is the major obstacle to this. And as we also know that Putin has repeatedly called the collapse of the Soviet Union as a tragedy. So now we know that the decision to attack Ukraine was signed on January 18, so long before the real attack has happened. So that is the Russian demands not to join NATO, etc., negotiations with the United States, that all was just a delay in preparation for the offensive. Russia has consistently justified itself by saying that such actions are necessary to step, that what we heard before during this event, are necessary to step to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO and bringing NATO closer to Russia borders. Also, Russia is trying to impose the view that this war is a confrontation between the United States and Russia, as I mentioned before also. And this Russia is thus protecting itself from the United States' intentions to ruin it. And this is view, as I see, is quite popular in many societies. But the fact is that throughout the existence of independent Ukraine, in these last 30 years, the European Union and NATO especially have made no promises. No promises, I'd like to stress this, no promises that Ukraine has any real chance of becoming a member of these organizations. Yeah, they said that the doors were open, but not specific promises, especially documented. So therefore, the Russia's explanation that in such a way it didn't want NATO to approach to each borders is absolutely nonsense. So what's going on now in Ukraine? So as you know, on February 24, Russia launched a large-scale attack on Ukraine. Nobody expected that, but unfortunately that happened. So, and they called this a special operation on denazification. So they planned this to finish in a few days and finally get the total control over Ukraine. 2-3 days was special operation. However, the Russian authorities again miscalculated their assessments of the real state of the Ukrainian army and the readiness of the entire Ukrainian people to fight, and the attitude of Ukrainians to the Russian occupiers and the reaction of the West, which simply began to destroy the Russian economy. Russians thought that the predominantly Russian-speaking East and south of Ukraine would meet their soldiers with flowers like liberators. but instead they've been met everywhere like invaders. Even in those cities of the south and the east of Ukraine, which are now temporarily under the control, are not under control of the Russian government, people hold rallies every day in front of the armed Russian soldiers. They urge them to leave and to tell them they are not happy with the presence there. So instead of blitzkrieg, which President Putin was counting on, Russian troops have stuck in Ukraine and are losing the manpower, weapons, and military equipment. So as of today, Russia's military losses are as follows. More than 12,000 servicemen, about 2 of them are conscripts. They claim that they have very few conscripts in Ukraine, but it's not true, because the video proves with the conversations of the captures Russian soldiers in Ukraine, a lot of them are conscripts. About 2,000 soldiers are captives. So they lost more than 350 tanks, more than 1,200 armored vehicles, about 200 artillery systems, about 30 air defense systems, about 60 aircrafts and helicopters. These are the brand new aircrafts like Su-30, Su-34, and Su-35. So this is definitely not the result the Russians expected. The Russian army turned out to be incapable of fighting against an enemy of equal capabilities, albeit one that was weaker in quantity and quality. During these 2 weeks, the Russian army failed to destroy Ukrainian communications and other electronic control systems. It was assumed that Russia would support its military offensive with cyber attacks, but this threat did not materialize. The Russian Air Force, despite having almost 10 times as many aircraft as Ukrainian Air Force, have been unable to establish control over Ukrainian airspace. Instead, they lost quite a few of their latest aircraft, as well as helicopters. Another problem for the Russian army was logistics. Reserves, rear communication capabilities, all this is functioning very inefficiently. And it turned out Russians have also big problems with strategy and tactics. The Russian army was advancing from all the sides without holding any front line, coherence, and integrity. Its forward units not only broke away from the rear, they did not even intend to have them. They also advanced in very dense columns. They even stopped car to car, and as a result, they received huge amounts of burnt weapons and equipment. In difficult areas, instead of retreating and regrouping, the command decided to split to the formations into small groups and break with them through into the cities. So they became easy prey for both Ukrainian military and territorial defense. All the Russian soldiers entered in Ukraine without phones because their commands didn't want them to send back information to Russia and about what is really happening in Ukraine. As a result, the soldiers scattered across the Ukrainian forests and fields without ability to determine their location, and their relatives and friends in Russia have no connection with them. There were obviously no plans of what to do and where to deploy if Kyiv, Kharkiv, and other big cities in Ukraine could stand. And the Russian command does not come up with anything better than to continue shelling these cities with everything they have and send their troops over and over again to storm them. But the result is the same. Russian army continues to suffer losses both in equipment and in personnel. Seeing that the situation is not going on as planned, and that their troops are suffering losses, Russian army started openly committing real terrorist attacks. These missile, bomb, and artillery strikes on civilian objects, houses, schools, hospitals, kindergartens. An air bomb was recently dropped on a maternity hospital in Mariupol. Cities in eastern Ukraine with predominantly Russian-speaking population has been literally wiping off the face of the earth. As a result, 2 weeks of Russian military aggression, according to the United Nations data, 550 civilians were killed in Ukraine, including 79 children. Almost 1,000 people are wounded, among them 100 are children. And it is noted that this figure may be much higher. More than 2.5 million people became refugees. The question is, are all of them Nazis? The Russians are constantly disrupting green corridors for the evacuation of refugees and the delivery of humanitarian aid to the cities in eastern Ukraine. The city of Mariupol, in fact, is now facing a humanitarian catastrophe. And the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov cynically offered to provide humanitarian corridors in exchange for Ukraine's capitulation. Russia kept 2 nuclear power plants, which is an outright nuclear blackmail. It's not clear what they're counting on. Do they want to repeat the Chernobyl tragedy? Russian leadership continues saying that the Nazis seized power in Ukraine, but both Ukrainian presidents since 2014 have direct Jewish roots. Moreover, Russians recently launched a rocket at Babin Yar in Kyiv, which is considered a symbol of the Holocaust in Ukraine. So who are the Nazis? Well, very popular now is the explanation by Russia that this so-called special operation is the response to the fact that the country has been shelling the cities of Donbass. That Ukraine has been shelling the cities of Donbass, which were occupied by Russia all these last years. However, after 2 weeks of Russian special operation, it can be seen that the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk, which were allegedly shelled by Ukrainian army, look much better than denazified by Russians, the cities of Kharkiv, Mariupol, Sumy, and Chernihiv. And most importantly, no one in the world believes in these Russian lies. So as of the peaceful resolution, as for the ways of peaceful settlement, from the Ukrainian perspective, everything is simple. Russia must withdraw all its troops from Ukraine. Ukraine establishes control all over its territory, which it had until 2014. Russia pays reparations to Ukraine to the damage caused by its military aggression and starts dealing with its internal affairs and problems, which will become only worse. However, I do not think that this will be possible as long as President Putin is in power in Russia. On the contrary, he will continue escalating, and we see this every day. Since Russian occupiers did not achieve the main goals of capturing certain cities and territories, there is a high probability of intensification of terrorist methods waging the war on their part, shelling the civilian infrastructure and residential areas with missiles and bombs, intimidation of the local population, conducting informational psychological actions in order to undermine public confidence in government officials on the ground, dissemination of misinformation, and using the locals as hostages. There are several reasons for such actions by Russian troops. The main one is that Putin cannot draw back, because then it will be the end for his regime and him personally. Obviously, even Russia's top government officials, today oligarchs and top propagandists, are no longer happy about what is happening. They continue to say that sanctions for Russia are only for the bad, or they continue to threaten those who support Ukraine, in particular with the use of nuclear weapons. However, they themselves are well aware that this military adventure of Putin and sanctions against the Russian economy will have very negative consequences for Russia in the nearest future. They would like to change something, but there is nothing they can do about it because they are very afraid of Putin. At the same time, Putin will continue to order the destruction of Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, terrorize the civilian population, send the next cannon fodder for slaughter. Yes, all the Russian soldiers in Ukraine now, they are cannon fodder. It is possible that if the situation for Russian troops worsens, Putin may be ordered to use weapons of mass destruction, nuclear or chemical. Nevertheless, Ukraine will continue to fight. and kill all Ukrainian occupiers, all Russian occupiers who come to its land. So that's it from my side so far, and will continue during the discussion. Thanks.
Sir, you're on mute.
Do you hear
Thank
me?
you very much for your views. And I must say two things. Firstly, I will not comment as of now. We will hear the Russian side as well. And then maybe I will give one or two questions for deliberation. That's the first part of it. Secondly, we certainly have all the sympathies with every casualty which has happened in Ukraine and every fallen soldier of both sides. Because as I am a soldier, I have seen enough of conflict. We salute every soldier, irrespective of which side he is, whenever he falls in line of duty. So with these two words, I will now invite with the same question our speaker from Russia. The question remains the same. What do you think have been the factors leading to such a situation? And what do you think is practically possible to bring peace in this region, peace and security for everyone? The speaker is Alexander Dudchak. He is a leading researcher in the Institute of CIS countries. He has authored many books. He has also been assistant professor in Department of International Economics. And I think you have an experience of Kiev as well. And also in the National University of Trade and Economics. So I think we couldn't have had a better person to get the Russian perspective from somebody who has also been in Kiev and who is also a Russian. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope I can answer on your questions. First of all, I want to briefly recall the situation in Ukraine before the operation of the Russian army and why this operation was inevitable. The events in Ukraine were preceded by the long process of gradual establishment of control over the country by the West. The legitimate government in Ukraine was overthrown after successful military political operation in the winter of 2013-2014, in accordance with the traditional scenario of color revolutions. This revolution was prepared, organized, and legitimized by the United States and its allies. After February 22nd, 2014, a total dictatorship was established. Any political discussion was prohibited. Its main ideology was Russophobia and glorification of Nazi accomplices and the World War II, the elimination of the Russian language in all spheres of society. Russian is native to 90% of the country's population. The ban on any sources of information that have a point of view different from the official one. The main political and economic course of the state is to break traditional ties with Russia, focus on the European Union and NATO. This was unacceptable for the majority of the population and suicidal for the economy. Why has this ideology become dominant? Hitler turned the great German nation into Nazis in the second years without using the information technologies currently available. Today, we see in Ukraine the result of 8 years of careful, thought work in conditions of total dictatorship, which was legalized by the West. The territory of Ukraine was increasingly being military developed by NATO countries. Ukraine was not a member of NATO, but this wasn't an obstacle to using Ukraine as battering ram against Russia. After the coup of 2014, the constitution of Ukraine included article on joining NATO and European Union as the goals of the state, like a purpose of the state. Join an organization cannot be a purpose. It can only be a means to achieve any purpose. NATO began to create its base in Ukraine. Also, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, 30 biological laboratories were created in Ukraine. That was confirmed by the American side. With the high degrees of probability, we can say that one of the tasks of the United States is and its allies is to create bioagents capable of selectively infecting various ethnic groups of population. In our case, the Slavic population living in the territory of Russia. Documents published by the Ministry of Defense indicate that studies of the avian influenza virus, including the most dangerous strain of H5N1, were underway in Ukraine. In Ukraine, methods were developed by enhance the pathogenic properties of bacteria. Using genetic engineering methods, it would be possible to achieve the creation of combat strains. The Americans could specifically infect wild birds so that they fly to the territory of probable enemy, which for United States is the Russian Federation. This is well as Zelensky's statement about the plans to create dirty nuclear weapons, said Russia a task to need to be solved. All Russia's calls to Western partners to take into account direct vital interest in the field of security were not just ignored, but Washington deliberately aggravated the situation. Remember how Zelensky's statement about the desire to obtain nuclear weapons was applauded, stating the participants of security conference in Munich. Moreover, an outright provocation was being prepared, which has documentary evidence. Why couldn't President Putin have done otherwise? Does anyone have any doubts that the Ukrainian army would have launched a full-scale invasion on the territory of Lugansk and Donetsk Republic? Does anyone really doubt it? More than 120,000 personnel, 345 tanks, 2,160 armored combat vehicles, 820 artillery and mortar guns, 160 multiple rocket launchers, including the 300mm rocket launchers Smerch. The Ukrainian army in the 20th of February, that is on the eve of the events, created clear lane through the minefields. Is it for defense? Subversive groups were thrown not only into the territory of Donetsk and Lugansk Republic, but also into Russian organized terrorist attacks. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Reznikov, was a big fan of the Croatian Operation Oluya. It was a famous operation in Bosnia War in '95. Went to Croatia to study for experience. He invited the relevant specialists from Croatia to Ukraine. Plans with dates of the invasions are confirmed by documents received by Russian intelligence. President of Ukraine Zelensky announced mobilization on February 23rd. What if this is not preparation for war? Before President Putin announced the operation, what could President Putin have done? Did he have to wait for the beginning of aggression from Ukraine for the picture of victims and destruction? How many could have died in the fire of the first hours? The 1,000, 10,000, 50,000 nationalist battalions with the local population wouldn't stand on the ceremony and would act like an American in Iraq. They would smash houses and communications without thinking about the number of compositions of victims. And would Russia be able to show evidence in Ukraine crimes even in such case? Was it necessary to sacrifice thousands of lives for a picture that no Western or Ukrainian media wouldn't have shown in any way? Then how to knock out the Nazis from the residential quarters? Russia would be to blame in any case. In this case, the Western media wouldn't have noticed anything, but they wouldn't show that the Russian government has done nothing to protect its fellow citizens. At the same time, no sound was heard from any of them about the fate of those who were terrorized by the Ukraine in the Donbass for 8 years. The war in Donbass, unleashed by the West by the hands of Ukraine, claimed 13,000 lives. The dates of beginning of the so-called Russian aggressions, of course, were known to London and Washington. They didn't doubt Russia's immediate response, but perhaps they didn't assume preventive action and such a scale retaliatory strike. Well, it's beginning of hostilities is more or less clear. Was it necessary to stop at the border of Lugansk and Donetsk republics within the front line before the start of the operation. The terrorist essence of the Kiev regime would not have changed, just as in the case of the expansion of the Lugansk and Donetsk republic to the borders specified in the constitution of the republic corresponding to the border of the Lugansk and Donetsk region within Ukraine. Russia would have received a full set of current sanctions. The territory of Ukraine would have continued to be developed and under control by NATO countries. And now the Ukrainian army acts like a terrorist. It hides behind civilians, places artillery at the residential buildings, shoots its soldiers who do not want to fight, does not allow the civilians to leave. According to available information, NATO planned the actual occupation of Ukraine since December 2021. Russia has received data on NATO's plans to deploy 2 military land brigades, 1 naval, 1 air, and an air brigade with possibilities of carrying nuclear warheads on the territory of Ukraine. The remaining territory of Ukraine would be annulled for the West. In the south, in Tchakarova, the base of British fleet, NATO bases across the countries, missiles aimed at Russia on the border with Russia, and like jackpot, monkey with a grenade, Zelensky with a nuclear bomb. The victims and the damage suffered during the liberation of the Lugansk People Republic and Donetsk People Republic would be meaningless without the cleansing of the whole of Ukraine from Nazi ideology that has become a state. It would be a source of constant military terrorist threat. Missiles in the Chernihiv and Sum region with a flight time of 4 minutes to Moscow, with a full range of international sanctions, it's not the best options for ending the conflict, which wouldn't have been finished. Those who in Ukraine are waiting for a liberation from Nazi occupation were very afraid of this. They are sure that any freezing on the conflict in any part of Ukraine would lead to a punitive operation and Gestapo purges of the population not loyal enough to the regime. Thanks to the sanctions and the absence of the need for Russia to comply with the conditions imposed from the outside since 1991 for the functioning of the domestic economy. There are opportunities to restore economic sovereignty. There is no need to follow the rules of International Monetary Foundation. Capital outflow will finally be stopped. It is positive and necessary to lower domestic enterprises, direct ruble investment in research and development, and finally restore the domestic aircraft, automotive, electronics, and other industries. It's a pity it didn't start in 2014. The transitions to new economy is not just possible, it's its widest window of opportunity, and there are resources for the transitions. It is possible to do through making the right administrative decisions while respecting the sovereign interests of the state and public support of country's leadership at the highest level. Russia has everything it needs: exceeds natural resources, the availability of technologies or scientific base for their development, sufficient financial resources, even despite the robbery of part of the Russian gold reserves by the civilized West. In addition to this, Russia has partners who don't take part in anti-Russian sanctions: China, Brazil, Argentina, Iran, Pakistan, I hope India, and many other countries which their technologies, resources, and market. Russia cannot wage a full-fledged economic war against European Union, which is connected, of course, with the cessation of supplies of oil, gas, and coal to Europe. Russia has not yet begun to apply sanctions that are painful for European Union and United States: oil, gas, wheat, corn, inert gas, uranium, palladium, etc. The military operation in Ukraine will be over sooner or later. Wounds of grievances will gradually heal. Ukrainian enterprises that were not finally killed with European reforms will gradually restore ties with Russian suppliers and buyers. Residents of the current territory of Ukraine will return to their home and to their jobs. The prospects will be completely different. Instead of stable degradation, deindustrialization, and depopulation, there will be opportunities to rapid development. Ukraine during the last 10 years lost 10 million people. They left Ukraine territory. It's so great government on Ukraine. It's so democratic. Yes, the United States has achieved certain goals with the help of the conflicts and exposing Russia as an aggressor. It was possible to unite Europe into a single anti-Russian front to inflict a wound in the relations of Ukrainian and Russians, which will not be easy to heal, to get an endless reason for anti-Russian sanctions. But sanctions would have been invented under any other pretext. And their task is not only damage Russia, but is to derail the European economy, defeat it, and make it dependent of the next American Marshall Plan again. The main thing today is the cessation of hostilities by Ukraine, not Russia. It's hardly possible to wait from a call from the Ukrainian authorities to save the lives of their citizens. And if the residents of Ukraine want to blame someone for the victims and destruction, they should turn to the Kyiv authorities, to London and Washington. It's on their hands the blood of those who are dying in Ukraine. The Russian leadership has indicated two main goals among the objectives of the operation in Ukraine: demilitarization and denazification. The first one basically doesn't cause any question. I mean, demilitarization, it will be soon finished. It will be solved without hostile, with minimization of victims and destruction. That is why the Russian army is moving slowly. It doesn't act in American way. It doesn't conduct carpet bombing and does not target civilians. The second task is more difficult. It requires the establishment of control over the territory, information work with the population, changes in the activities of media, changes the school curriculum, and so on. 8 years have not been in vain. The process will take some time, but still the return of population to common sense and its real history and culture will be more natural than imposition of Nazi ideology. Of course, the experience of the Nazification will be, which was carried out in Germany and Austria after the Second World War, will be used, and everything going on. This process will be finished soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We heard two views. I am very sure that Mr. Fedyk wants to reply some of the points, but we will leave it towards the end because we will not start the debate. Otherwise, what will happen is that there are other panelists who need to perhaps take their turn, and some of the questions will also get answered by others as well. So that's one point. Secondly, before we
just one word. I would like to thanks to Hans. Okay.
It's a promise. We'll give you a chance. We'll give you a chance. Don't worry. But towards the end, because if I give you a chance now, then the whole discussion will get hijacked. So that may not be appropriate at this stage. The only thing I would like to just point out of the two presentations is a point to ponder. Here is a case where the people in Ukraine are suffering and suffering like hell. Russia is also suffering financially, and perhaps somebody else is getting benefited who has got nothing to do with two. And he has got a very clear-cut aim to say that, no, I never promised it. If they assumed it, what's my problem? So just deliberate over it. We will discuss it when we get back to you, both of you, and I'm sure you've got what I am trying to convey. Now there is a role of NATO, certainly. A fair amount of I think mentions have been made of the role of United States as well. And to speak on this, we have Miss Velina Tchakarova. She is the director of Austrian Institute of European and Security Policy. She is also the advisory board member in the Indic Research Forum and instructor in Real World Institute. And you've also been, I'm given to understand, conducting strategic foresight for Australian Defence Forces. So this is a complex situation. In 2008, I think Ukraine asked for the membership. The membership has not been given as yet. I'm given to understand that NATO was never interested in giving a membership because neither NATO wants to join direct land border with Russia, nor Russia wants direct land border to join direct land border with NATO. Now there is I think some communication gap. With your experience, I'm sure you will be able to decode it for us as to why people are fighting when the guy who has to give membership is not interested in giving, and the guy who is hoping to get a membership is getting the whole country pounded. What is what in your opinion is the thing which is perhaps driving this conflict in the manner in which it is going? Velina.
Thank you very much, Major General Asthana, for your moderation, for trying to somehow navigate this highly emotional and very, very difficult panel session. And I want to stress right from the beginning, I haven't prepared any speech or any talking points. As we see, things are developing ad hoc, so I will try to contribute with several important insights to this discussion. First, I would like to stress that my expertise is in fact global system transformation. So in order to assess the role of NATO and other, of course, important strategic developments, I also want to point to the ongoing global system transformational processes and to put the geopolitical context why we are where we are right now in Europe. Why did the Russian president go all in? Because what he did on February 24th is without a doubt going va-bank, making a move on Ukraine. This
Sir, you're on mute.
Sorry, your mic has gone off, Miss Velina. Can everybody hear Miss Velina?
Sir, she has joined. She has joined.
Okay.
I'm back. Sorry, somehow my internet connection dropped me off.
No problem.
Now I'm back. Yes, I didn't push any button. My hands are actually not on the laptop. I'm sorry for this inconvenience. So first and foremost, I want to explain very shortly the geopolitical context, the current global system transformational processes, in order for us to also understand the calculations behind this move. And then, of course, I will explain the role of NATO and, of course, the United States in this specific global context. Now, the first thing is that I argue that what we are observing right now with Russia's war, which began on 24th of February, is the beginning of a second Cold War. It was already mentioned by some other experts. So we observed a kind of intermission between a first and second Cold War, in a similar way how we observed an intermission between a first and second World War. And in a sense, this period right now is marked by evolving systemic trends. First one is the bifurcation of the global system, evolving around the systemic rivalry between United States and China. So in a sense, we need to place this decision by Putin also in this particular framework. Second important trend is, in fact, the systemic rivalry itself, in a sense, where was the Russian president seeing Russia's role in this systemic rivalry, was also relevant for his decision to make a move on Ukraine. Third, is the increasing tensions between the two Asian giants, China and India, which are going to further grow given the role of India and given the role of China in the Indo-Pacific decade. Fourth important trend is the American retreat from the Middle East, but also in the long run, actually from the old continent, due to the shifting focus on the Indo-Pacific and East Asia. And if we put the two main cases, Ukraine and Taiwan, from an American geopolitical perspective, of course, the hierarchy of these two very different cases is absolutely clear. America would have reacted in a very different manner if China would have made a move on Taiwan, a military move, of course, as compared to the way how the United States reacted to Russia's move on Ukraine. And I think that this was also factored in by the Russian president when he decided to launch a full-scale war against Ukraine. And the fifth important trend right now is the fluid ad hoc geopolitical formations between the middle powers. Basically, they are right now engaging in various ad hoc rapprochements or formations while navigating this complex environment, while trying to avoid taking sides. Now, in the case of Australia, we saw that Australia finally took a side, even though that Australia was also geoeconomically engaged with China. And I argue that we are going to observe more such examples as the Australian one of middle powers, which at some point of time will be confronted of either or choice. Now you see that these trends are currently simultaneously taking place. The outcome of the transformationary period of the international relations is absolutely not clear. That means we don't know exactly how the bifurcation of the global system will basically result. Will China manage this post-pandemic period to further economically grow, which it needs in order to face the American global power domination and global power projection? And then, of course, now, given this background, we have a new phenomenon, geopolitical phenomenon, which I coined in 2015 as the dragon bear, namely modus vivendi of systemic coordination between China and Russia in relevant strategic domains. Why? Because first, they wanted, of course, in 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed parts of Ukraine with Crimea, and then military got involved in eastern Ukraine. And the following isolation of Russia led to this decision by the Russian president to initiate a modus vivendi with Beijing in order to create a credible counterweight to the American global power projection in all relevant domains, from, of course, trade, finance, and economy, to agriculture, commodities, what we are observing right now, and of course technological breakthroughs. That means also shaping the fourth industrial revolution, and then of course to defense and space collaboration. So this is not an alliance, nor an intent. We are not going to witness a military alliance or defense alliance as as NATO, but this modus vivendi is now, of course, paying off. And I argued that the Russian president factored in direct Chinese support. So basically, the dragon bear is now one of the reasons why he decided to go all in and to make such a move on Ukraine this year. Now, the geopolitical calculation of Putin is, it was also already mentioned, and I want to stress from a geopolitical point of view, he wants to position Russia in this systemic rivalry. He knows that Russia is no longer a global power. it is going to have a regional power projection, and by positioning itself in this long game between Washington and Beijing, he wants to upgrade Russia's positioning, which is why he wants to deny the very existence of a sovereign country, basically to, if possible, to actually unite Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia into something that is kind of post-imperialist, revisionist geopolitical project, not the Soviet Union, of course, but in a sense, he needs a larger territory, he needs a bigger regional power projection in this direct, so to say, zone or zone of influence or territory, which if he's successful, of course, would mean that he will also be in charge of the largest and biggest European country. And that, of course, would mean, once again, if successful, that he, as the junior partner of the Dragon Bear, because it is clearly an asymmetrical relationship, is going to rewrite the rules of the European security architecture. And this is the second important dimension, next to the dimension, to the direct dimension, of course, to go against a sovereign country, to erase a sovereign country from the current international map. And by doing so, he would basically turn the whole European continent, and specifically the other European powers, which are European, also NATO members, most of them, into a kind of geopolitical backyard of the global affairs. Because on the one side, he's factoring in that the United States will be increasingly withdrawing from the old continent due to the systemic rivalry with China, is going to actually refocus and reshift military capital, diplomatic capital towards Asia. And by doing so, he will turn the rest of the European NATO members, and here I am arriving slowly but surely at the point about the future of NATO, is going to turn the rest of the European NATO members into irrelevant geopolitical backyard of an object instead of subject of the future international relations. Once again, of course, if he's successful in what he is doing right now in Ukraine. And of course, NATO is currently in a very important phase, dealing with its next strategic document. And this strategic concept of NATO that is supposed to be discussed and actually approved in June this year in Madrid at the next summit, is going to reflect on these dichotomies among the NATO members. Now, he was, I mean, the Russian president, of course, was factoring in a big dichotomy between the NATO members, specifically between the European and the transatlantic ones, when it comes to the future global order, because of the different hierarchy of future threats. Of course, from an American perspective, and it was already mentioned, it's going to be threat number one is going to be China, and then, of course, major geopolitical and geoeconomic terrain, and of course, from security threats perspective is going to be the Indo-Pacific. Now, if you look at the European NATO members, it's all about Russia, now even more relevant than ever. The Central Eastern European NATO members are going to be on a high alert mode, and the Western NATO members, mostly centered around France and Germany, do not perceive, in fact, China as a security threat at all. And now, of course, even with the war by Russia against Ukraine, are in fact still in a kind of modus where they think they can get along with Putin. And I can give you an example. Both countries were in fact in a geopolitical rapprochement with Russia prior to the events in 2022. They were absolutely convinced that they would get along, that they will normalize relations. And even now, when the first the military escalation began, and then it was followed by obviously military operations in all directions. So Ukraine was attacked simultaneously in all directions. Even then, they were still, of course, calling the Russian president, and even as we speak today, there has been a phone call between the German chancellor, the French president, and the Russian president. What I'm trying to say is that it is a clear dichotomy which needs to be reflected in the strategic document. How exactly they're gonna solve this issue, I have my serious doubts. Of course, where the Russian president miscalculated hugely was that he was factoring in a further incoherence in the European approach, and in reality it turned out that he united all European NATO members as never before, and he gave basically a new substance to this alliance as it has never been before in the last 30 years. Now, of course, if we look at the Central Eastern NATO members, for them, first and most important security guarantee since the beginning of the existence of these countries following the collapse of the Soviet Union has always been and will always be the security guarantee coming from the United States, which is bound to NATO. So in a sense, there will be always, and most of them still are, of course, very much pro-American oriented. And of course, they will still seek to keep NATO active on the ground. But as I said, given the current transformational trends, I have my doubts as to how long, United States will still be active on the old continent, and whether the European powers, and this is now where we are at the moment, also at the level of the European Union, where there is another strategic document being discussed, which is the so-called strategic compass, and it is a European strategic document. That means that right now there are parallel processes taking place on the old continent, where the European member states, so basically the member states of the European Union, are also in discussions, and in fact they want to launch a new strategic document, a new strategy by the end of March during the French presidency. And this document should also entail relevant directions and orientations when it comes to crisis management, when it comes to defense capabilities, when it comes to future partnerships and alliances, and also, of course, when it comes to credible defense budget, how the old continent itself, how the European powers can also come together and adequately respond to this. Yes, and adequately respond to these realities. So in a sense, a lot is going on right now. And as I said, right from the beginning, it will be decisive, depending on the outcome of the war, in which direction these trends will further continue.
Certainly, there are a lot of uncertainties, lot of, I would say, turbulence in the global groupings and global orientations. And as you mentioned, and very rightly so, there is going to be certainly some more things which you can deliberate on in case we get time subsequently. Will there be an additional, a new and alternate financial system because of sanctions? Will there be another, will NATO, shall we say, get closer, or it will have differences with United States? Because like it or not, Europe will not be as peaceful as it was after this war. This is one of the things which most of the analysts feel. So now we move on to the next issue, and we move from here to the other side. I would say that yes, whatever has happened is one behavior of NATO and United States. Now, this, in one of my articles, I had said that this war is a test bed of global power contestation, and the whole world is watching it as a test bed because everybody has something out of it and some lessons out of it. So obviously there are some lessons which will be there perhaps for Taiwan as well and for Japan as well. So to speak on this issue, we have Dr. Satoru Nagao. He is from Hudson Institute, and I won't go into too much of your CV because I think it's very much, you are very active on Twitter and everybody reads it quite frequently. So I won't go into your this thing, but over to you straight away as to what do you feel on the topic, as to how you should perceive now, how the global response will be if there is a threat to Taiwan, if there is a threat to East China Sea. Dr. Nagao, please.
Thank you very much, sir. And I will use the PowerPoint, so I will share my PowerPoint.
Okay, but try and skip some unnecessary slides because we are getting late. So no problems. You can go ahead.
I have already entered Sunday, not Saturday now.
Okay, no problem.
Could you see my PowerPoint, sir?
Yes, I can. Others can comment if they can't see. I can see.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very
Okay.
much. The title of my presentation is The Threat of Taiwan Invasion and Japan's Quest for Nuclearization. Do not blame me because the organizer gave me this title. The view from Japan's reaction towards Russia aggression is indicating why Japan started talking about China's invasion toward Taiwan or how to rise our nuclear deterrence. So that's why I need to introduce what is Japan's stance towards Russia's aggression toward Ukraine. That is today's topic. Okay. Simply said, Japan stands with Ukraine. Japan is providing Ukraine with a bulletproof vest, helmet, winter battle dress uniform, tents, camera, medical supply now, providing emergency humanitarian assistance to the US, $100 million in such area around Ukraine as health and medical care, food. Provide loan to Ukraine at least US $100 million too. So, and join in the effort to isolate Russia from the international finance system and global economy, such as excluding selected Russian banks from the SWIFT messaging system, or prohibit of the insurance of the transaction of the new Russian sovereign debt in the primary and the secondary market, etc., 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 etc. So that's current Japan stance.
Dr. Nagao, your slides are not moving, but notwithstanding that, you can go ahead with your presentation. I think you can forget about the slide. Do
not worry about this because I need to hide my broken English, so there's no sentence. But anyway, but this kind of the Japan's policy toward Ukraine is indeed historical, because the shipment of the defense supply to the country party to the conflict is banned in the past in Japan indeed. So that's one small step for the world, but one giant leap for Japan. So the question is, Japan stands with Ukraine now, but why? This is the topic and related to its topic I received from the organizer. So first, Russia could not credibly justify its military operation to the United Nations. This means that it is using unilateral action to change the status quo by force. If the international community, including Japan, allow Russia to win the war, China will follow Russia's example by using the sample, using the same type of invasion against Taiwan, India, or possible others. So this is not acceptable for Japan. That is the first reason. And second, if Russia wins the war against Ukraine, the US will need to prioritize Russian deterrence in Europe. the US could not withdraw its military force from Europe and redeploy them to the Indo-Pacific to deter China. Japan is aware that it would face a serious situation if it had to deter Russia and China at the same time. In this case, Japan needs more strong nuclear deterrence. That is the reason Japan started to talk about nuclear sharing like NATO to raise our deterrence. Because Russia is nuclear power and we need to deal with. And around Japan, I need to explain what happened indeed. This is third reason. Japan shares a border with Russia and has fought a war with Russia in the past. In recent years, Russia has repeatedly provoked Japan indeed. For example, in 2020, Russian military planes tried to enter Japan's territorial airspace 258 times, setting off the repeated scramble of the Japan's air self-defense force fighter jet. In 2021, 5 Chinese warships and 5 Russian warships jointly circled Japan. And these incursions are evident that Russia is a threat to Japan. So the US and Australia share the same interest, but in case of India, India is far from Russia, so India cannot feel such kind of thing. But for Japan, Russia is a threat. So in the March 10 to 11, this means that just yesterday, the 10 Russian naval ships crossed the Tsugaru Strait again. This next slide is orange one is the route the Russian military plane tried to enter Japan's territory air. Yes, red one is Chinese, but orange one is Russian. And these are the ships across the Tsugaru Strait just yesterday. So indeed, this attitude is common, we believe, around Russia, because we can check the list of the countries the Russian government set up unfriendly countries. The list includes all the countries that share the border with China, except China, all share border with Russia, except China, Mongolia, and Central Asia are included. So that is the result caused by what Russia has done in the past, I think. So Japan stands with Ukraine because Japan cannot allow the unilateral action to change the status quo by force. Because Japan is aware that it would face a serious situation if it had to deter Russia and China at the same time. And because Japan shares the border with Russia and Russia has repeatedly provoked Japan, these are 3 reasons Japan stands with Ukraine. So now is the time for us to unite to maintain rule-based order. This is Japan's stance. So I talk about Japan, not talk about India today. I'm pro-India always, but as a Japanese, I must explain this. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and your views, which are certainly, this is the perspective of Japan, and you are very well entitled and justified in your perceptions as far as Japan is concerned, because you do have maritime border with Russia. But I would only like to highlight 2 things. As far as a shall I say impartial analyst, I must tell you that this unilateral action, and I've served in United Nations also, so I must tell you everybody, this unilateral action is a bogey, because when US went to Iraq, it was unilateral action. When US went to Libya, it was unilateral action. When they went to Afghanistan, it was also a unilateral action. And when China came to Ladakh, it was also a unilateral action. And none of these actions have been sanctioned by UNSC. So yes, I agree that what is happening is anyone who thinks that he can do it and get away with it is doing so. And certainly the global community is watching. As I mentioned, that this is a test bed of the global power contestation. If Russia is punished, China may not do so. If Russia is unpunished, then China may get emboldened. Is something which we all will have to see. And those 2 conditions are not the same, because Taiwan is still not the same, for the simple reason, because as of now, I think there is demography is almost the same. Then Taiwan is an economic hub, which China will not like to destroy. So there are different, I think, dimensions, but that I'll leave it for some other time. Now, I think we'll move on to the next one. If there are sanctions on Russia, then certainly there is an impact on Russian economy. There's no doubt about it. It will also impact on global economy. And to speak on that, we have Mr. Ozierski. He's an independent security expert. He has written many books and he has been writing on CAR. He's an external expert in organizations like OSCE Academy and also in the US University of Central Asia and some other universities. So I'll keep your introduction short. Over to you, your views on the impact of sanctions.
Okay, thank you very much for introduction. It was so nice, but I'm not author of so many books, I would say. Okay, okay, thank you for the invitation, and I will try actually to follow maybe some like this all emotional presentations. We are in very difficult time linked to the Russia-Ukrainian war and during the time of economic war. And we know that it is happening. Many experts describe the situation, the conflict, the war in Ukraine as a watershed moment in history, that we are moving toward the new world economic order. If it's true, we will see. It's very tricky now to forecast what would happen next because we're still in the phase of war, and we don't know how long this war would still happen, because as some speakers mentions, both sides, they are willing to, let's say, they still are ready to fight to defend their positions, and it's difficult to find, let's would say, the win-win situation. And actually, we have the lose-lose situation, I would say. Okay, so what would be the impacts? What would be the impacts? I said, I have mentioned it's a watershed moment in the history. Some experts, investment strategists, for example, from Credit Suisse, prognose that we could face the new order, new monetary system, some new Bretton Woods 3. I would say that the currency, that the emergence of the Eastern, let's say, currencies based on the commodities, probably like the Chinese RMB, more linked to the commodities. Actually, we see the division because of the sanction. We have the, let's say, Russian commodities and non-Russian commodities. Yes, so we see that the fourth package of the sanction of European Union, they involve also the sanction on the steel sector. So European Union is ready to give up from the Russian commodities as steel, which is very important, which would, let's say, hit the construction industry in Europe with the prices, with the deliveries, with the logistic. So we see that the West consolidated its position in concern to Ukraine, and is going to punish Russia for its steps, and is going to bear costs. Okay, it's very important. That is very, let's say, it's the moment where United States, where European Union, where G7 is, let's say, using the common front in the, let's say, economic war against, let's say, against Russia, and is willing to pay for this. Okay. There is a huge support of the, let's say, Western society, and also, if the society understands what are the costs, it's still unclear, because yes, there are 2 weeks of the war. We don't know how long it would happen, and how, let's say, what would be the period of the sanction and how they actually would work. Yes, so we're facing the new world order. It's very difficult, I would say, to be positively neutral. It was mentioned before by the speakers that India is going to be positively neutral. It's very difficult to be I would say, go between country. Okay, sometimes too, because the sanctions now that are imposed by the European Union, the United States, they have imprinted, let's say, that they shall not be evaded. Okay, so some countries, they're playing the games that they're going to be in, let's say, go between the countries. They will use their position. They would act, let's say, as a reseller of the Russian commodities and so on. But in fact, what we see the let's say Western sanctions, the sanctions, they're going in financial sector, and in financial sectors, if we adapt anti-money laundering procedures, it's very difficult to avoid them, because the Western banks would go for the final beneficiary, and if this final beneficiary is Russian side, then they would stop such transaction, and they will also sanction the intermediary. And this is very important signal for both India, for the China. And also, if we discuss this new world order, let's say, if it's going to happen, the most important is how China would act in such case, how China would play with the Russian commodities, how China would, let's say, help Russia to survive, I would say, even to, let's say, to model the new trade, let's say, trade roads. Okay, so no go between countries, no sanction evaders, and that is the, let's say, the main things what I would let's say signal. And then if we discuss, let's say, the impact for the Russia, okay, Russia want, let's say, to build this system, Russia want to propose the alternative, yes, but if Russian, let's say, economy is big enough and is so crucial for the world that let's say other countries would help to build such system, to alternative system to the Western, I would say. Yes, if India is going to bear the cost, if China is going to bear the cost of the Russian ambition, of the Kremlin ambition somehow. Because even if we observe the oil, let's say, market, the gas market, okay, it's difficult for a certain period of time. But then we started to, let's say, in Europe, there is huge discussion about the alternative supplies. And alternatives, they are there. The ongoing discussion to leave the sanction from the Iran, yes, to leave the sanction to, let's say, to allow Iranian oil and natural gas to flow. The discussion to reactivate Caspian gas pipeline, yes. So this is not that Russia could for the long time play with the energy commodities, okay. Then we have the gold, okay, what I mentioned, the good and the bad commodities, the Russian and non-Russian commodities. We see the steps from United States to block the trade of the Russian gold. Of course, Russia could find the markets, could sell its gold to the Middle East, to China, but if China and Middle East want to buy such gold, okay, so you have the commodity, you have the gold, but if this gold is has the same value as the Western gold, because the certificates for the Russian, let's say, precious metal refineries, they were withdrawn. So we have very difficult situation in the commodities market. At the same time, we have, let's say, the emergence of, let's say, of the importance of cryptocurrencies. The Ukraine is the time when we see the cryptocurrencies in actions. At the same time, both Russian ruble and Ukrainian hryvnia, let's say, withdraw to cryptocurrencies, to Bitcoin, to Tether. Okay, they're two different currencies. They work differently. One is centralized, the second is decentralized. The cryptocurrencies, they are also the answer for the SWIFT. Okay, if the Russia is, let's say, refused to use the SWIFT system, the cryptocurrencies could act as an alternative model. But at the same time, as yesterday, there is a clear signal from United States and that the sanctions, they're going to look for the evaders that deal with the fiat currencies and cryptocurrencies. So it's not that for the average solution, there is counteraction in both ways. The cryptocurrencies could act as, let's say, something that you can use to evade sanction, something that, but at the same time, they somehow could be traced. For example, the Tether, which is very interesting currency because it's pegged 1-to-1 to US dollar, and that's why it's easier, for example, to trade with the Tether, is based in Switzerland. So we centralized. So if Western, let's say, world is pushing the Switzerland to control Tether, then it's impossible to use. Or later we could see that maybe some new, let's say, cryptocurrencies would be established to facilitate the trade, but at the same time the risk is totally different. The financial market is enormously affected, I would say. We have Russia, we have Western countries, we look for the beneficiaries, who is the real beneficiary, but we have also the countries in between, like go-between countries, like Uzbekistan. Okay, the Uzbekistan, from one side, is benefiting from the brain drain from Russia, because the IT sector is actually, let's say, running from the Russia to Uzbekistan, also to Armenia. As I know, the whole, let's say, IT sector of Moscow is now in Yerevan, in Armenia. So maybe it would accelerate the, let's say, the economy of those countries, but at the same time, they are bounded to the Russian economy. For example, in Uzbekistan, when we have, let's say, the example of the cotton industry and textile factories that were built based on the, let's say, the credits, for the export credits, and most of their products were sold to Russia, like 85%, and now they need to repay such credits. And with the, let's say, with the falling rubles, it would be very difficult. And then at the same time, if those credits were issued by the Western banks, it's even more difficult, because how they would receive the money from Russia. So we have the whole, let's say, bunch of the countries that are affected indirectly. Okay, so like I'm right now like speaking from the Central Asia, from the Kyrgyzstan, and could see like how they behave the economy, which is bounded directly to Russian ruble. Yes, okay, the Russia is proposing some solution, for example, for the trade of the oil, but it's difficult to escape from the, let's say, from the economic turmoil. Yes, we have the one, let's say, humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, but if the sanctions would, let's say, evolve and would be kept, we will have, let's say, the economic crisis in Central Asia. We will have the migrants from Central Asia returning from Russia because of the fall of the ruble. We have the mass, let's say, exodus of the migrants, and we will have the problems in such countries as Kyrgyzstan, probably as Uzbekistan, and where it would lead, we still don't know. Okay, so it's not that the sanctions, they would affect, let's say, small part of the world. Each country, the system must be rebuilt. There must be new system, I would say. How it would work, it would be more fair or not, it's difficult. But when we discuss, okay, we have the war, but it's very difficult to carve, let's say, the sanction that would not affect, let's say, people. But now it's difficult to prognose where we are going. We see that they could be certain beneficiaries, the countries that would benefit in maybe in short term, but in long term, the new system must be created. Okay, we have the Russia, which somehow at the moment is limited from the world economy, I would say. But at the one moment must be reintegrated, and how it would happen, it's very long story. Yes, but what I would signalize for the India, for the China, for the authorities, that it's very difficult to go between. Okay, it's very difficult to be positively neutral. The financial sanctions, they are not positively neutral. They would hit, let's say, each economy. They would go for the, let's say, individual businessmen, individual enterprises, and how to deal with them, we still don't know. We don't know the rules. We know that there are sanctions, they're being structurized at the moment. We know that the people with the specialists in anti-money laundering, they now, let's say, receiving the instruction how to deal. But what would be the effect? Still don't know, I would say. Okay, so that would be from my side. I would be happy to take part in the discussion, and really, because there is space for discussion. I still believe, and it's very important to listen to both sides on the conflicts, because at one point of time we need to, let's say, make this new world order. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your point of view, which is very well taken. I must say a few things. One, economic war is also as lethal as other war. Although, yes, there is no human life of human lives, but certainly there is a loss of human earnings. So that there is no doubt about it. Secondly,
Well,
it is seen that whenever such things happen, and with experience after every war we have seen, there are certain adjustments made by everybody. For example, as far as the economic system is concerned, now if the world feels that economic system is too biased towards West, automatically the globe itself will invent a new economic system and an alternate economic system, exactly in the same manner in which, when during Corona you all would have realized that the world was overly dependent on the global factory. So there was a fair amount of cry that every country should perhaps be a self-reliant in supply chain management, and there should be an alternate supply chain. So apparently these are the things which are things of the future, and after perhaps this kind of conflict, there will be a lot of realization and a lot of alignments, whether in terms of strategic alignments we have been talking about for so long, there will be political alignments, and there will also be a fair amount of demographic alignments, and there are certain social angle to this conflict. So now let me come to the social angle to this conflict.
Major General, maybe I would add something like one more important message, that it's important not to cause the spillover of the conflict. Because before, during the discussion, there was the discussion about the Wagner, let's say, private mercenaries, and we don't know how Russia would behave, how Russia would be more rational.
We'll discuss it at the end. We'll leave it for the end. We'll leave it for the end. Now let me go into the other facet of this conflict, and the other facet is that, as somebody already mentioned, that 2.5 million people are already refugees, and there is also a problem of the right-wing nationalism in Europe. So Europe not only is going to face the problem of energy, it's also going to face the problem, although it's giving a very bold stance that they are all united, and this conflict has united all of them. So there is 3 cheers for all of that, but notwithstanding that, there are a lot of issues in terms of refugees, energy, as well as nationalism. So to speak on that, we have Mr. Christian Kaunert. He is the Professor of International Security in Dublin University, and I believe you have a lot of expertise on policing, and you are on to that university as well in South Wales, and you are Director of Jean Merritt Center of Excellence on counter-terrorism, if I am told. So I'm sure we couldn't have found a better person to speak on this topic than you. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me today, and thank you very much for being able to talk on this particular topic. So obviously, I will focus primarily on the refugee crisis and the implications of the refugee crisis that we're going to have. Just to start off with a little figure that American intelligence before the war started estimated that we're going to have roughly about 5 million refugees from Ukraine during the war. But I can safely say that this is not going to be sufficient, that we are very likely to see something along the lines of 10 million refugees until August. So we're going to see the most significant refugee crisis that we've seen since the Second World War. Just in the first week of the war, we had a refugee flow of 1.5 million, which was larger than the refugee crisis that Europe had in 2015, 2016, from largely the southern Mediterranean. So we have a crisis that is much, much more important than in terms of numbers and in terms of possible implications than what we've had in 2015, 2016. And I may add that I told people, decision makers, I told them since probably last September, last October, that this is likely to happen in the near future. And it was foreseeable from all the facts that we had on the ground that this is likely to happen. But let me just put this first in a broader framework, because it is important to point out that while we have a battle fight between Russia and the Ukraine, there's a larger geopolitical fight that is going on inside Russia, and that is the two versions of Russia. The one version of Russia that is the modernist version of Russia, the nationalist version of Russia that wants to be part of the Western world, perhaps embodied by President Gorbachev, by President Yeltsin later, that is very clearly losing the battle, and the possibly more imperialist and perhaps also more isolationist version of Russia that is obviously being portrayed by former Soviet President Stalin, and that is also being pushed at this particular moment. Now, why do I say that? I say that because it is important in understanding why this refugee crisis and why this immigration crisis is so important. It is important because it harks back at why Russia needs to fight the Nazis. It goes back to this idea, why is Russia announcing a justification for this particular war, which is denazifying Ukraine? Now, as a scholar of terrorism and of counterterrorism, I'm very aware that this is a Soviet argument that has been made since the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. All of the Western countries were constantly accused of being the Nazis, being a successor of the Nazis, being a fascist state. This went on throughout the Cold War period as an argument of Soviet propaganda, of course. And that was also something of why certain terrorist groups were supported in Western Europe in the 1970s. For instance, Baader-Meinhof in Germany was very much in that ideological spirit. And also, if we look at the Red Brigades in Italy, if we look at all of these kind of terrorist groups that were supported in the 1970s, that was very much in that particular mindset. The West, the Nazis, and therefore any kind of political violence is legitimate against fighting against the Nazis. It goes back to the most glorious moment of Soviet history, which is, of course, the defeat of the Nazis in the Great Patriotic War in the Second World War. And as a result of that, there's a desire to relive those battles in order to, of course, make Russia great again. So in that sense, it is very important to put that into context, because, of course, it also goes back to which groups are being supported today in Europe and the European Union by Russia. And we see on the whole there's a lot of support but for a lot of different far-right groupings. So we see, for instance, the financing of the presidential campaign of Marine Le Pen in France. We see the financing of the Lega Nord, Salvini. We see the financing of the Alternative für Deutschland in Germany. We see the financing of the Brexit campaign in the United Kingdom. We see the financing of a lot of far-right activity because, of course, in order to be able to fight the West needs to embody the Nazis. So that is something very, very important, and that is also why the current war is being justified as a denazification campaign of Ukraine that is now perceived to be part of the West, that is now perceived to be an enemy of Russia. And because it is perceived to be an enemy of Russia, it is being called a Nazi, just like Western Europe, just like in general was being called in the 1970s, in the 1950s. This is a usual rhetorical tool. Now, how does it bring us back to the migration crisis? This brings us back to the migration crisis because, of course, there were elements of that already in terms of Russian support for the refugee flows in 2015, 2016, went then through Turkey and then went through the European Union, and at the time caused something of a very significant crisis. And then, of course, one of the big indicators of Russian support of the Belarusian crisis that we had last autumn, when President Lukashenko brought thousands of refugees from the Middle East, from Iraq, from Turkey, from a number of different countries, that were then planted at the border of Poland and were then pushed across the border into the European Union, also to cope with those flows of refugees, which were at the time not particularly numerous in terms of actual numbers, but of course was still significant because it was a clear test case for the Kremlin to see how would Europe react to those numbers. And what we're seeing now is that we're dealing with a hugely different number game. We're dealing with very significant numbers, the most significant numbers that we've seen. And I remember asking people in Brussels, I remember asking them before the war whether they were prepared for war. And at the time, it was something of a heresy. You couldn't plan for the war. You couldn't plan for any kind of refugee crisis that would come from the war, because that would mean that you make the war happen almost by talking about it, even though the signs were very clear that the war was coming. It was very clearly, in terms of empirical science, that this was going to happen. You couldn't plan for this. Now, what is currently happening is that the European Union has taken a decision that we never thought would happen. In a sense, 30 years ago, roughly 30 years ago, the European Union adopted a regulation on mass migration. It was adopted just after the wars in Yugoslavia, the successor wars in Yugoslavia, where it was seen that, you know, in cases of mass exodus of people, the European Union would have to react somehow to accommodate those streams. Certainly, you could prevent people from the former Yugoslavia at the time to arrive in the European Union. So they needed to develop a legal instrument to deal with those kind of streams. This legal instrument was never really used. It wasn't used at any point. And in fact, last year, the European Union discussed abolishing that instrument entirely. There was some efforts within some EU institutions to keep it alive, but realistically, they were discussing abolishing this instrument because for 30 years it was not used. For the first time ever, this has been used now. Just with the war in Ukraine, it has been used. It has been breathed a new breath of life, if you will. And it is now possible for Ukrainian refugees to arrive in the European Union. There is no restriction on numbers. There is no restriction on anything. But the problem is that while there's no restriction in terms of numbers, there's also no planning that went with this. So what we're going to have is a situation where we will have very significant amount of refugees coming to the European Union, probably distributed across the European Union, but we will have a very significant amount in the major countries like Germany, France, and others. Perhaps not so much in Britain, because Britain decided not to make it easy for Ukrainian refugees to come into Britain. But there will be a very, very significant amount of numbers, and there is very, very little planning for it. So we will see probably in 2 to 3 months, we will see severe problems that are going to arise from those numbers because of the lack of planning, because of the lack of investment, because of the lack of foresight. And these are going to feed into the same political movements that we've had after 2015, 2016, when we will see that, of course, the far right will capitalize from those streams of people that are invariably going to find problems. Russian propaganda will obviously portray the West as Nazi, and this is something that is new. This is invariably going to happen. I'm certain that Russian propaganda is going to portray German rearmament in the same light. This is also something, and Western rearmament in general will be portrayed in that particular way as well, which will then also feed into the narrative of a strengthening of the far right, but it will also strengthen the far right in terms of substance, because in terms of substance, we will see increasing levels of political support. We will see continuing financing of far right activities by the Russian state, as there has been for the last 10 years, 15 years. We will see financing of Russian state of far right terrorist groups, which they also have been doing for the last 10 years. It's also not something new. It's something that has been done for a number of years. So we will see a lot more of that, probably also part of a revenge. You know, you were putting sanctions on us, so we're going to sponsor far right terrorists instead. So we're going to see a very, very frictional relationship between Europe and Russia for the next years to come. I'm not sure that Cold War is necessarily the best term, because the Cold War, in fact, was cold, whereas what we're seeing at the moment is a little bit more heated than the Cold War. But we're going to see inside Russia, we're going to see the takeover of the isolationists. We're going to see Russia trying to decouple itself from the Western world. And that is going to feed into the frictional development between the West and Russia. Also, the kind of more Western-minded Russians are going to be obviously silenced over the last, I mean, they were already silenced over the last couple of years. That is going to be a trend that is going to continue over the next couple of years. And that will lead to a more frictional relationship, and will continue to increase problems inside Russia and inside the European Union and inside the West more generally. So I don't have much of a word of optimism right now, because it's very difficult to be optimistic how to spiral this escalation backwards so that we can go to a more peaceful time period, that we, in a sense, some of the most peaceful time period between Russia and the West has been the 1990s and the 2000s, in fact. But it's very difficult to imagine how we can go back to that time period. I think we've seen a very structural change. And yeah, so I'll end on this relatively pessimistic note, and I'm sorry and I apologize for that. Thank you.
No. In fact, I would say that I had an article which I had written, and you, I think, repeated exactly the same word: heated Cold War. Are we into heated Cold War 2.0? That was an article of mine which is there on Google. So apparently, you see, both sides have used mercenaries. Both sides are threatening to use more of them. Both sides are also going to outsource the conflict in some manner. That is the as a shall I say, from the impartial angle or from the analyst angle, that's what we pick up from both sides. So and these are both what is being said is both from the leaders themselves. So apparently, it's certainly going to be much hotter than the previous Cold War, perhaps. But let's. I had promised, I think, our guest from Ukraine. He wanted to say something. So it's now. Are you there, Mr. Fedyk?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes. No. Yeah. You are there. Okay. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Fedyk, you wanted to respond. So over to you, and then to the friend from, and then Alexander will. Then I'll give the floor to Alexander, and then thereafter anyone who wants to.
No. Okay. I'll try. Thank you. Thank you. I'll try to be short. What I wanted to say is that it was amazing listening to such portion of Russian propaganda in this very short period of time. But okay, I won't comment on everything the participant from the state aggressor said. So I'll just say just comment on the most, let's say, the most insane, that Russian army doesn't target civilians. So all of you after this event can look into internet at the footages from cities of Kharkiv, city of Mariupol, city of Chernihiv, and see what Russian army turned these cities into. But just this coming back to the very question for the topic of our panel about the factors that led to Russian military aggression. I would say that it would be interesting. I don't know if you read that article. There is an article written by former advisor to President Putin, Mr. Surkov, in November. So it's called something like exporting the where the chaos gone, exporting impacting the stability. And in this article, he's writing. So he's the quote: "For the centuries, the Russian state, with its stern and sedentary political interior, has preserved itself solely thanks to the tireless tending beyond its borders. It has long forgotten and most likely has never known how to survive in other ways. For Russia, the permanent expansion is not just one of the ideas, but the real essence of its historical being." And he said that Russia will expand not because it's good or bad, but because it's physics. So, this is not my word. This is not the, let's say, Ukrainian propaganda. This is what the Russian former advisor to Russian president said. So, what are the talks about the some NATO used Ukraine? This is NATO Russian war. So, this is it. That's what I can say so far.
Okay. Alexander, you would like to respond, and then I will come back to Velina, because Velina has raised her hand. Yeah, John, you would like to respond?
Sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, of course, it's Russian propaganda. We know that now we can see a very high quality Ukrainian propaganda with the support of Western specialists in propaganda. They talk us about destroying of hospitals and pregnant women showing in the on the photos. It's so bullshit, because it's many times was said about it was true. I sent in chat film about Donbass, about concentration camps, about victims there, about people who was died, 30 people who went out from the miners, was killed the first days of Ukrainian invasion in 2014. Every day was killed people. But tell me, how, if it's so beautiful country, why they army acting under the fascist flags? It's not true. With symbols of Nazi on the border or bodies of soldiers, with the flags of swastikas, of like German troops in the Second World War. And now I have relatives there in Lugansk. Don't tell me funny tales. My friends in Ukraine, in Kiev, first year after coup, 6 people was arrested, 1 was killed. During the last 10 days, the people who was experts in economics, in writers, poets, was arrested now, and they make activities like a real Gestapo. 10 million people went out from Ukraine since 2014. 10 million left Ukraine. Many industries was destroyed totally. It's a United States used Ukraine just like a cow. The cowboy can't say that he loves cow, but he uses it, and like he can't say he likes horse, but he uses it. And Ukraine, for NATO, for United States, it's just a remedy from the Russia. It's really pity. But too many people now, nobody knows where is it people. They was killed in Kiev, in Odessa. Is it not true that 44 people was fired in Odessa? Funny. It's Listen, look on this face. 44 people.
It's ridiculous. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous.
How we can talk with these people? But it will not so long.
Okay. No, got it. I appreciate that both sides have the grievances and both sides do have a point. And also, I mean, grant me that much of experience that in any conflict, you have the battle of narratives also, which goes along. So both sides will have the narratives as well. But notwithstanding that, war is certainly a tough call, and therefore, any other point you have, any other point you would like to make, John? Okay, Velina, you wanted to make some point. Velina, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm here. I want to stress a few things. First, when in 2014 Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea, it was not about NATO. It's very important for India and also for the Asian, of course, for the Asian partners to understand when we talk about security concerns, Russian president has never had serious security concerns when it comes to NATO. First, because NATO membership is not possible with a country that has frozen or any territorial conflicts on the ground.
Yes.
It's not possible. This is actually in the agenda of NATO. You cannot actually integrate a new member state if this member state has not demilitarized its borders, which is not the case with Ukraine and Russia, as we know. And also if the country has territorial or any kind of other disputes or military conflicts on the ground. So take, for instance, Moldova. You have Transnistria with Russian peace troops. You have a serious situation there. Take Georgia. You have creeping borders. No chance. So it is actually an open secret. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it, and it has never been an issue. And when in 2014, Russia decided to invade Ukraine and to take away territories from Russia, it was not about NATO at all. There were no fears coming from Moscow regarding potential membership. It was actually the provocation from a Moscow's position came, in fact, from the European Union, because Ukraine received a so-called accession membership. Accession membership is, in fact, the possibility for Ukraine to become part of the common market of the European Union. Okay, and even now, when we talk about membership perspective for Ukraine, which is going to be in a reality, it's going to be a very long, of course, enlargement process. Still, for Ukraine, there is an absolute equal possibility to have a free trade agreement with Russia or with any other third country. So, in fact, it's not mutually exclusive. There are a lot of things that need to be clarified here. And if you have 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons at disposal, as it is the case of Russia, you have 10 to 1 comparison with the tactical nuclear weapons by the NATO members on the old continent. You're obviously in such a tactical advantage that once again your security concerns are not really serious ones. Let me clarify once again for you, and especially for the Indian audience, to understand what the Russian president right now is doing is not going to stop in Ukraine. If he's successful in Ukraine, he's going to make a move on other parts of Europe, because the target is not Ukraine. Ukraine is a station on a very long journey for this geopolitical ambition by this president. And you said at the beginning, the Indian professor said it very well. Vladimir Putin is not Eltsin and is not Gorbachev. And this was the most important sentence actually that he said in his speech, and it is a reality. It is a reality that we, the security and geopolitical experts, were expecting in a long, maybe 10 to 15 years phases of slow and creeping invasion. Several phases, you know, not all
Okay,
in,
okay,
not
Velina.
one.
Okay,
Okay,
I got-
understand.
I got your
May I
point.
ask?
Just a minute. I'll give a chance to everyone. Velina, now she made some very relevant points. I want to just pose the same question which Velina has given, because not that I was not aware of what you have said, but I just, instead of that question coming from me, it is better it is coming from Velina. Now, Velina very clearly identified and told this question is to Fedyk. Now, Fedyk, Velina has very clearly told, and it was, I think, obviously known to everybody, that if you have a problem in Donbass, for whatever reasons, whether you are to be blamed or Russia is to be blamed, or that's immaterial, you will not be included in NATO was known. Now, if that was known, then why your president, I mean, I'm curious to know about it, why your president was harping on it. No, I want to become member of NATO. He went to Munich and said, please give me a time frame to get to include me into NATO. Why was that? Why was this provocation? Fedyk, can you make me understand this?
Yeah, sure. Why? Yeah, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you call this a provocation? First, it's written in our constitution. Second, the majority of population of Ukraine supports joining NATO. It doesn't mean that
No, but
Ukraine
NATO is
will
not
join it.
interested.
No.
The
Let
NATO
me finish.
is neither interested nor you are qualifying for it, because of you applied in 2008. You did not get an opportunity, and your Donbass region was under trouble. So she has defined as to why you could not have been included in NATO. She has explained it. Now you answer Velina, whether your population voting to join NATO, was it making sense to Velina? Just explain to Velina.
Well, I'm telling you, you are not giving me the possibility.
No,
to answer.
you are free to speak.
Okay,
Free to
thank
speak.
you. Thank you very
Free to
much.
speak. Yeah, free to
First,
speak.
it was written in the constitution. Second, the majority of population of Ukraine support this decision, because NATO, we see NATO, the Ukrainians see NATO as the possibility for have the better security for our country, for our country to be secured, like other countries in Europe, like other countries in Eastern Europe, the same, not to be threatened by Russia. Because if Ukraine had been the part of NATO, Russia would have never attacked Ukraine, because it would be scared to attack NATO. Now it is scared to attack NATO. It is scared because NATO is much stronger, and Ukraine now it's stronger. You know, 2 weeks in Ukraine, Russian troops haven't achieved their real goals. So
I appreciate that. So you see, as an analyst, now I'll give my response a little later. John, you wanted to say something. John, you wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry, it's the wrong name there, because my name is Alex. Sorry, it's
Okay.
I can
Sorry.
change.
No,
Listen,
your name being
very
displayed is John, so that's why it came out from my mouth.
Don't
Yeah.
worry, Alex. So funny tales about Crimea. Can you tell me how many people were killed in Crimea as when so-called invasion of Russia? How many people was killed? 2 million citizens there in Crimea. Nobody was killed. If it's so awful life, why 2 million? No, it's not 2 million, 2.5 million now lives in Crimea. So awful life. And don't talk about Georgia. 2 days, during 2 days, Georgia fired by Abkhazia and Ossetia. 2 days, missiles. And only after Russian troops came to support civilian people. If you don't know it, you don't know nothing. But if it's lie, don't lie here. And now it's NATO, and Ukrainian NATO. It's real dangerous for Russia. I said when I talked, 4 minutes flying rockets to Moscow. It's impossible
Okay.
to.
Yashas, how much time we have got? Yashas,
I said
So we have around,
4
we
minutes
can,
of flying rocket.
can we
missiles.
take 5 more minutes?
yeah, 5 minutes will do, sir.
5 minutes will do.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. I think we'll wind up in next 5 minutes or so.
Christian Kaunert, sir, has also raised his hand. So
Now, Mr. Christian, you wanted to say something, please.
Yeah, just wanted to follow up on what Velina said about what caused the initial problem in terms of the European Union offering associate membership to Ukraine. And I wanted to remind the audience that, in fact, Russia received a very similar offer from the European Union. Russia received the offer with the false basis, where Russia was to be integrated into the European Union. And Russia's response was, we are not like those other small little countries. We're an important power here, and we need something better. That was Russia's response at the time. And it wasn't that the European Union didn't want to engage with Russia. The European Union wanted to engage with Russia. They wanted to integrate with Russia, but it was Russia that didn't want. So I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, John, another one of the speakers mentioned regarding 2 versions of Russia. Are you comfortable with that, or you have some other point of view? 2 versions of Russia.
Sorry.
I think Christian, you mentioned that.
Two
Yeah,
versions of Russia.
Can you repeat that so that we can get a response from him? Because this is an
Sorry.
important.
Yes, I mentioned the point because, of course, within Russia, there's always been a very strong discussion between those who, like Gorbachev, like Yeltsin, wanted a modern Russia, Western Russia, wanted to, versus those who, like the plotters against Gorbachev, or in fact, those who wanted to remove Yeltsin from power at the time when Yeltsin.
Okay, Alexander, you got it. You got it, Alexander. Alexander, your response.
No, the role of Gorbachev is really awful role, and Yeltsin is the same. The Gorbachev is the man who destroyed great country, Soviet Union. Okay, and Yeltsin, it was a very difficult time for Russia, but unfortunately, it was a part of history. And now I'm sure that in soon will be closed the so-called museum of Yeltsin Center, so-called Yeltsin Centers. We are talking about the history on the Yeltsin, how it was democracy. It was not democracy. Okay, United States those time likes Russia because it was state who lost own sovereignty.
Okay. Mr. Ozierski, you want to come in?
Well, renewal.
Yes, yes. I would like to comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quickly,
Because,
please. Quickly. Just
okay.
one liner.
I would say that we have, let's say, 2 very conflicting narratives at the same time. I see the problem, for example, from the Russian side, that Russia is still operating the 20th century, and we are in 21st century, and the conflict has totally different layers as it was in, let's say, before the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's different area, a different geographic characteristic, and very different states. I would say that is very important. When we're discussing the Russia-Ukrainian war, it's very risky to bring another, let's say, layer to the conflict. This nuclear layer, nuclear threat layer, biological warfare layer. Okay, because even when we discussed the laboratories in Ukraine, there was non-Lugar cooperative threat reduction program. Russia was a part. There was biological laboratories in different states, post-Soviet states. Also, there were, let's say, technical centers in Russia that were financed by United States to minimize the threat. to deal with the specialists, with specialists from that were developing the biological chemical warfare. And unfortunately, we're returning not to even not to 91, we're returning to the 70s right now. That is very risky, and that is the role of the India to take,
Yes.
let's say, to
There
engage
is no
the discussion.
There is no doubt that
Yes.
it is risky. There is also no doubt that we all are concerned. And let me also say in no uncertain terms. Okay. So I think we had a very good discussion, but let me just wind up to say there is no doubt that it's going to a dangerous situation. The world is also facing and eyeing on this situation and monitoring it as to how it happens. We all hope and pray that good sense prevails, because what has happened is the dangerousness of this conflict is that we have put two sides into two different corners. If you see from the Russians' point of view, as of today, President Vladimir Putin is on such a tight corner that he cannot go back without achieving some objective. He has to achieve some objective. And the sanctions are of the kind that there is no room which the West has given him to not achieve that objective. So there is no incentive for him to cool down. Now, as far as Ukraine is concerned, they are also bubbling with the nationalism. Their leader has come up in a manner to galvanize the kind of resistance which he has. And therefore, the situation which is coming up is that not realizing that this heroics can be quite dangerous, because we are not, what we all are concerned as a collectively, as globally, as global citizens, what we all are concerned is that the escalation dynamics, even by accident, should not go up. Now, that is something which we all are concerned about. We hope that in future days, some good sense prevails in future negotiations, because there is a hope, and the hope must remain. The channels of communication must remain. And I am given to understand that the channels of talk are still there, although both sides will press hard to posture themselves in a better bargaining situation before they come up to the next negotiation table next. That is what I visualize. So and we hope that as far as both sides are concerned, if we find a better solution in which the miseries, global miseries, can be reduced, I think that would be very great. It was a great pleasure interacting with all of you, hearing all the views, and due to paucity of time, because I think the previous session got about 20 minutes later, but yet we are still, for the organizers' pleasure, we are still finishing almost in time. So notwithstanding that, I would say that it was a great pleasure interacting with all of you. My big thanks to the organizer and to the Indic Research Forum, and to all the young researchers whom this forum represents. And I am sure, even if because of the long, shall we say, duration of this seminar, not very many people may be there on it as of now, but certainly the YouTube will find many more audience, for the simple reason, because as of now everybody wants to hear the views of both sides, and that is what we try to somehow synergize in a manner that we can hear each other in a decent manner, and not the way the TV debates are being held with one guy shouting on the other guy and things like that. So I think it was my big thanks to all the panelists for being very patient, also to all the audiences and to the organizers. It's back to you, Indic Research Forum.
Thank you, General. The Indic Researchers Forum would like to thank all and pay our gratitude towards the session chair and all the speakers for such an insightful conference. I'm sure that everyone here, including me, have found this conference really engaging and informative, as our speakers passionately and lucidly touch upon key aspects and questions regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. At the end of this event, I would also like to thank all the session chairs, speakers, audience, and the team that worked for making this wonderful conference possible. And against all odds, let us hope that peace be restored in Ukraine through dialogue. Good night, everyone, and Jai Hind.
Thank you.